What happens when someone dares to touch the sacred with filthy hands, chosen ones? The answer is unfolding in real time, and it's more terrifying than they ever imagined. Those who mocked you, slandered you, and plotted against you are now facing a karmic reckoning, so brutal it rattles not just their lives, but their entire bloodline. Karma didn't lose its address, it was just waiting, sharpening its claws in silence. And now it's showing up like a storm in full fury. Comment 777 if you feel the vibration of this truth in your spirit. Because the ground beneath your enemies is about to split open. And to those who stand faithfully with this channel through your presence, your words, your shares, and your super thanks, I thank you with a depth words can barely capture. You are part of this divine movement, witnesses to heaven's justice. Lean closer, because in the next moments you'll see why your silence was a weapon, why your spirit was encrypted by God Himself, and why those who laughed at you yesterday are trembling today. This isn't just karma. This is divine judgment, served cold, and it has perfect aim. Let's dive in. God's chosen ones. What's this shocking karma hitting everyone who targeted you? They never realized that crossing paths with you was not a casual encounter, but a collision with eternal law. They thought they were slandering just another name, discarding just another fragile heart, manipulating just another soul who would eventually collapse under the weight of gossip and betrayal. Yet in truth, they were trespassing into a sacred architecture they could not comprehend. For you were not merely human, you were an initiator of cosmic resonance, a vessel aligned with the very geometry of heaven itself. The Apostle Paul once wrote, "Do not be deceived, God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap." Galatians 6-7. And those who touched you with wickedness unknowingly planted their own ruin. Can you imagine the terror when they discover that every word they whispered against you was a hammer striking their own foundation? They believed their cruelty was invisible, yet each lie echoed like a seismic tremor through the halls of heaven. And just as a cracked arch eventually collapses under its own flaw, their lives began fracturing the moment they placed their hands against the chosen. You carried a frequency their instruments could not measure, a wavelength older than time, echoing like gravitational waves through unseen dimensions, just as Psalm 105-15 declares, "Do not touch my anointed ones, do my prophets no harm." The very air they polluted with lies began turning against them. Why do you think their nights are restless? Their plans collapsing like sandcastles under an unexpected tide. Even their own shadows betray them. This is no coincidence. It is resonance. The law of divine physics, correcting imbalance. It is like a forest that seems quiet until the lightning bolt strikes, reminding every creature that hidden fire still rules the canopy. They underestimated the force of spiritual symmetry, forgetting that every system in creation seeks balance, and balance always returns like an ocean wave, unstoppable, relentless, carrying with it the debris of pride. Pharaoh, the mighty ruler who hardened his heart against Moses. He believed the Hebrews were powerless slaves, yet every act of defiance only accelerated Egypt's collapse. Exodus 9:12 tells us, "But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not listen." Isn't it strange that arrogance blinds even the powerful to the countdown of their destruction? And just as Pharaoh drowned in the sea he thought was his weapon, so too do your enemies drown in the chaos of their own schemes. How many times must history repeat before they understand that divine law is not negotiable? Their downfall is not random, it is the architecture of judgment unfolding with precision. When rebellion builds a tower higher than its foundation, gravity itself becomes the executioner. Artists and thinkers outside Scripture have glimpsed this mystery. The Renaissance painter Caravaggio, infamous for his violent temper, painted saints with such piercing light that it seemed he was testifying against his own darkness. His life spiraled in bloodshed, proving the very sermon he unwittingly painted: evil eventually devours itself. Or listen to Beethoven's Missa Solemnis, where the Sanctus bursts with thunderous chords, an echo of heaven announcing that holiness cannot be silenced. Isn't it striking how human art, even when born in struggle, ends up reinforcing divine order, just as a cracked violin string cannot hold harmony? A corrupted heart cannot sustain its own deceit. The very brilliance of art reminds us that light always forces shadows to confess. Modern voices confirm it too. Maya Angelou, the poet who rose from trauma to glory, once said, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." Her words cut through pretense like a sword of truth. Those who targeted you showed themselves, but they did not realize they were also showing God the evidence that would testify against them. Their paranoia was not madness, it was judgment knocking early. They laughed at your gentleness, but your mercy was the mirror that revealed their cruelty. Mercy became the courtroom where their sentence was written, and the strange irony, the very grace they mocked became the weapon that undid them. Nature whispers the same verdict. A lion does not lose sleep over the opinion of hyenas. Yet when hyenas overstep, the roar of the lion shakes the savannah and resets the balance. You were not roaring, yet your silence was thunder in the spirit. They mistook your quiet as weakness, not knowing your stillness was like a mountain holding tectonic power. Isaiah 54:17 proclaims, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that rises against you in judgment you shall condemn." Isn't it chilling to realize that their very words became the weapons that boomeranged back to destroy them? Mountains do not need to shout to prove their strength, they simply outlast storms. Likewise, your endurance outlasted their schemes, and endurance itself became your crown. And what of the villains of history beyond Pharaoh? Nero, the Roman emperor, lit Christians as torches in his gardens, boasting in cruelty. But his empire decayed in paranoia, and he died by his own blade. Abandoned and despised, evil always ends in collapse. Just as Luke 6:38 warns, "For with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you." Isn't karma simply the universe echoing Scripture's eternal principle of sowing and reaping? These stories are not dusty records, they are blueprints etched into the architecture of time. Every empire of arrogance eventually builds its own grave with the stones it stole. Ordinary lives testify. A humble farmer from a small village, once mocked by neighbors for his faith, was known for sharing his harvest with widows and orphans. Years later, those same neighbors suffered financial ruin while his fields flourished against drought. He never sought revenge. Providence itself became his defense. Doesn't this remind us of Joseph in Genesis 50-20? "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. What is mocked today becomes exalted tomorrow when heaven writes the script." And if an unnoticed man from the soil can carry such divine vindication, how much more does heaven shield you? The chosen, Your resilience was their warning sign. Your forgiveness, their red flag. Your intuition, their unseen jury. They thought they were clever, shielded by human systems. But the countdown started the moment they touched what was sacred. Shakespeare's King Lear cries out, "The wheel has come full circle." And indeed, the wheel of justice turns with precision, crushing arrogance under its weight. Justice is not delayed, it is sharpened by silence. Every hidden act against you was recorded in heaven's architecture, like chisels striking marble. And now the masterpiece of judgment is revealed, unmistakable, undeniable. Now their foundations crumble, not because you cursed them, but because they failed a divine exam they never even knew they were taking. The universe collects its fee. The ledger of heaven always balances. This is not superstition, it is spiritual law resonating like a cathedral bell that cannot be unheard. You were never just an individual under attack, you were a living covenant. A test disguised as flesh. And now the correction has begun. Rise, chosen one. For your story is not one of defeat, but of vindication. Stand tall, because your very existence proves that heaven still rules on earth. And remember, the more they strike at your walls, the clearer it becomes that you were built on unshakable stone. They thought your silence was weakness, but silence in the hands of the chosen is never empty. It is thunder waiting for its appointed hour. What they mocked as passivity was in truth sacred restraint. The highest form of power hidden in stillness. You did not clap back when they lied. You did not expose their schemes when every fragment of evidence was in your hands. And you did not crush their name, though heaven gave you the right to. Why? Because you understood what Proverbs 17:27 declares. The one who has knowledge uses words with restraint, and whoever has understanding is even-tempered. Yet how many understood that your silence was not surrender but strategy? They laughed at your quiet. But each laugh was another signature on their own verdict. They assumed kindness was naivety. But kindness in the chosen is like a dam holding back a flood. The dam is not fragile. It is the only thing stopping villages below from being swept away. They never asked themselves what would happen if you released even a fraction of your power. Would their world not collapse under the sheer gravity of justice, just as Psalm 37:13 warns? The Lord laughs at the wicked, for he knows their day is coming. Heaven itself was already preparing their consequences. Isn't it terrifying that the very gentleness they ridiculed was the only shield standing between them and disaster? Nature testifies to this mystery. Think of the glacier, still, silent, unmoving for centuries. Yet when it breaks, entire landscapes are rewritten. Your silence was that glacier, quiet but ancient, restrained but inevitable. They thought the pause meant safety, but in reality, the pause was divine mercy, extending time for repentance. Doesn't every hurricane start with an eerie calm, a deceptive stillness before winds scream through the night? That's what they misread. You were not broken. You were the calm before the storm that now devours their illusions. Scripture records this pattern again and again. Jesus himself, accused falsely and mocked, stood before Pilate without defending himself. Matthew 27:14 declares. But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. They mistook his silence for defeat, not realizing it was the stage for resurrection's greatest victory. Isn't it haunting how history repeats? The chosen remain still, and the crowd interprets that stillness as weakness. while heaven knows it is the prelude to glory. In human history, villains have misunderstood restraint. Take Attila the Hun, introduced as the scourge of God, who ravaged nations with unrelenting cruelty. For years, silence from surrounding kingdoms emboldened him. But when famine and plague struck his armies, his empire crumbled almost overnight. His arrogance blinded him to the storm forming at his back. Doesn't this echo Job 4:8? As I have observed, those who plow evil and those who sow trouble reap it. What they perceive as endless triumph is only the slow sharpening of justice's blade. Your silence was not weakness, it was sacred discipline. A conscious refusal to roll in the mud where they crawled. Think of the owl in the forest. It does not screech all day like the restless crow. Yet in the dark of night, its wings slice silently through the air, and prey trembles before it strikes. That was you, the silent hunter of truth. Biding time. Waiting until heaven itself moved on your behalf. Can you see how their paranoia was proof they felt your unseen presence hovering like the owl's shadow over their schemes? Voices of wisdom outside the church grasp this law. Pope John Paul II once said, "The future starts today, not tomorrow." While they wasted today in gossip and betrayal, you invested it in silence and prayer. And while their tomorrow is collapsing, your tomorrow is unfolding as prophecy fulfilled. How could they not realize that the discipline of restraint was your crown all along? Silence, like a cathedral's vaulted ceiling, amplifies what is sacred rather than what is loud. You were not shielding yourself, you were shielding them. Each time you walked away, it was not a concession, but a rescue. They thought they won, but you were literally standing in the gap, intercepting storms they had summoned against themselves. Ezekiel 22:30 echoes this truth. I looked for someone among them who would build up the wall and stand before me in the gap, but I found no one. You were that gap, the wall between them and judgment. Now that you have stepped aside, the storm has no barrier. Isn't it chilling to realize they mistook divine mercy for weakness and mocked the very pause that saved their lives? But the storm has finally arrived. And karma does not negotiate. Their boldness evaporates as quickly as morning mist under the sun, because mercy has shifted into correction. Their punishment is not random. It is the echo of every word, every plot, every act they hurled against you. As Romans 12:10 proclaim, do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. The repayment has begun, and no cleverness can shield them now. And here lies the truth they never wanted to face. You were never quiet out of fear. You were quite out of power, like a volcano appearing harmless until the earth rumbles. Your stillness disguised a fire too fierce for them to endure. Stand, chosen one, because your restraint has become your roar. Lift your head, because your silence has revealed who you truly are, heaven's anointed, untouchable by petty schemes. This is not the hour of your collapse, but of your vindication. Rise, for your silence has spoken louder than 1,000 accusations. They thought betrayal was just betrayal. But in truth, their karma is tailor-made because the crime was spiritual theft, a sin the heavens never tolerate. They didn't merely waste your time, drain your peace, or siphon your energy. They reached for something untouchable, your spiritual identity, the essence branded by God's hand. Jeremiah 1-5 thunders. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. Isn't it terrifying to realize they weren't just attacking a person, but trespassing into a divine blueprint older than time? They wanted to carve their name into your scroll, but the ink was never theirs to touch. It wasn't admiration, it was counterfeit. They tried to replicate your voice, mimic your strength, and disguise themselves in your mantle, as though destiny were a costume to be worn. Yet spiritual inheritance is not a garment to be rented. It is a covenant written into the architecture of heaven, and like an architect who embeds steel into a cathedral dome to withstand earthquakes, God fortified your calling with frequencies no imitator can withstand. Isaías 42 contra 8 declares, I am the Lord, that is my name. I will not yield my glory to another. How could they ever imagine they could steal what was sealed by God himself? Nature itself shouts the verdict. The chameleon may change its colors to survive, but it can never become the sun. It imitates. A raven may mimic the eagle's cry. Yet when the storm arrives, only the eagle rises above the thunder. Doesn't this mirror your story? They borrowed your words, rehearsed your mannerisms, imitated your glow. But when the storm of testing came, they collapsed because borrowed light cannot survive real fire. It is the law of resonance in physics. Only genuine frequency sustains itself. False signals collapse into static. Scripture records one of the earliest thieves of the sacred Cain, who envied Abel's offering. Genesis 4-8 reminds us, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. What was he stealing? Not Abel's sheep, but Abel's favor. Isn't it chilling that envy always attempts theft of what cannot be stolen? Cain's hands were stained not only with blood, but with futility. For he discovered too late that favor is not transferable. And just like Cain, your enemies wander in confusion, punished not only by consequence, but by emptiness. History adds its own testimony. A man named Ananias, with his wife Sapphira, lied to the apostles in Acts 5, trying to counterfeit generosity by keeping back part of the money while pretending to give it all. Peter confronted them, saying, "You have not lied just to human beings, but to God." They dropped dead on the spot. Doesn't this reveal that when people attempt to manipulate the sacred for personal gain, the consequence is immediate and irreversible? Those who studied you with flattery and false smiles activated the same law. They triggered a divine audit without even knowing it. In our world today, stories repeat this pattern. I once read about a simple woman named Clara, a school janitor in a small town. She had a habit of praying over every classroom before dawn, unseen by teachers and students alike. When others mocked her quiet devotion and tried to copy her words without her heart, they found no peace. While Clara's family prospered beyond expectation, isn't it remarkable how ordinary faith carries extraordinary protection? Their envy turned into sickness of spirit, while Clara's hidden prayers built unseen fortresses around her children. And what of villains in history who tried to wear crowns not theirs? Napoleon, once hailed as invincible, crowned himself emperor in defiance of God and man. But his empire collapsed in exile on a lonely island, consumed by paranoia. He tried to seize destiny that wasn't assigned, and the burden crushed him. Doesn't this prove that pretending to carry the sacred is the fastest path to destruction? Luke 12:48 warns, "From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded." The weight of stolen callings is unbearable. They thought they could imitate your glow without carrying your cross. They forgot the psychology of endurance, that true strength is born in scars. not in imitation. They envied the fruit without enduring the pruning. They studied your every step like thieves mapping a vault. But they triggered the alarm the moment they touched what was consecrated. Romans 11:29 echoes the unbreakable law. For God's gifts and his call are irrevocable. Isn't it strange that they tried to rewrite heaven's decree with earthly pens? Now they walk in paranoia, drained finances, and fractured minds. Not because you cursed them, but because energy itself demanded repayment. Karma has no installment plan. It always demands full price. Their flattery was counterfeit currency. And now the debt collectors of heaven have arrived. What they stole became poison in their hands. Like unstable atoms forced into a molecule, they cannot sustain. Their very existence shakes under the weight of stolen fire. And here is the truth they can no longer escape. Spiritual roles are assigned, not stolen. They tried to rob you of what was divine. But now they face the merciless audit of eternity. Galatians 6-7 seals it. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Rise, chosen one. For you were never the victim of their schemes. You were the test they failed. Lift your head high. Because every counterfeit fades when the authentic walks into the room. Your silence was their opportunity, but your resilience has become their sentence. Stand tall, for you carry what no thief can steal, the seal of heaven itself. They thought they had destroyed your reputation, but in reality they shattered their own reflection in the mirror of truth. They believed that by crafting the perfect lie at the perfect moment, whispered into the perfect ear, they could poison the world against you. They exaggerated flaws, twisted facts into grotesque caricatures, and painted shadows where there was light. Yet Psalm 7:15 warns, whoever digs a hole and scoops it out falls into the pit they have made. Isn't it striking that their whispers became their own confessions? The more mud they hurled, the more their own hands revealed the stains. What they intended as an assassination was nothing but a mirror shattering back at them. The dirt never clung to you because it was never yours to carry. You walked unsoiled through storms designed to bury your name. And in doing so, you testified to Matthew 5:11. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. How many of them realized that every false accusation only elevated you higher in heaven's court? Your silence was not passivity, it was precision. The sacred discipline of refusing to descend into chaos. Isn't it ironic that your peace, which they despised, became the very fortress that shielded you from their schemes? Nature proclaims this law. The lotus flower rises from mud, yet its petals remain unstained, and the filth only proves the brilliance of its bloom. A mirror in a storm does not absorb the rain, it reflects it back, and in the reflection, the storm sees itself. Isn't that exactly what happened? Their lies did not diminish you, they amplified their own corruption. Like fireflies trying to mimic the sun, they burned out, while your light continued to rise. The Bible shows us this cycle in the story of Haman, who plotted Mordecai's death in the book of Esther. Esther 7:10 declares, so they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. Doesn't this send chills down the spine? The very gallows built for the innocent became the stage of the guilty. Your enemies repeated the same pattern. They constructed rumors like gallows, not realizing they were climbing onto their own devices. Art and music echo this reality. In Verdi's opera Don Carlo, the scheming courtiers whisper and conspire in shadows, but their plots unravel under the weight of their own deceit, leaving them exposed, while the truth of the righteous survives. Isn't it mesmerizing that even in grand stages of human creativity, the theme repeats, evil is loud in the beginning, but collapses under its own performance, just as Beethoven's Kyrie in the Missa Solemnis pleads for mercy in thunderous tones. So too did your enemies unknowingly cry out for judgment with every falsehood they spread. Modern wisdom also testifies. Eleanor Roosevelt, a first lady once relentlessly attacked in the press, declared, "Great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, small minds discuss people." Isn't it revealing that those who gossiped about you revealed the smallness of their own spirit? Their obsession with your name only spotlighted their lack of vision. And now, the stage they built to humiliate you has turned into a theater of their own undoing. With the audience already walking out, ordinary lives confirm the same truth. In a small village, a baker named Raphael was falsely accused of watering down his bread. Neighbors mocked him, yet he stayed silent, continuing to give free loaves to widows and orphans. Months later, when another merchant was caught cheating, the lies about Raphael collapsed, and his generosity was remembered while the slanderer's business crumbled. Doesn't this remind us of Proverbs 19:5? A false witness will not go unpunished, and whoever pours out lies will not go free. In silence, his integrity shouted louder than every rumor. The mask of your enemies has cracked. Their credibility eroded under the weight of their own duplicity. What they called victory was only the setup for their exposure. Luke 12:2 assures us, "There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known." Isn't it staggering how the very trap they set became the spotlight of their hypocrisy? Their lies were not bricks against your house, they were wrecking balls against their own. And now the dust clears, and the truth stands tall, louder than their chorus of deceit. The irony is sharp. They ruined their own credibility in the very act of trying to ruin yours. You never needed to fight for your reputation. Alignment with heaven was your defense. Rise, chosen one, for your integrity has been your crown, and your silence, your sword. Stand tall, because the truth has outshouted the lies, and heaven has vindicated your name. They thought they broke you. That betrayal and loss would scatter you into pieces too small to ever rise again. They were convinced trauma would mute your voice, that grief would crush your backbone, that despair would be the final coffin for your purpose. But Job 23:10 declares, "But he knows the way that I take when he has tested me. I will come forth as gold." Isn't it astonishing that what they thought was your burial was actually your refining? They imagined silence from you, yet all they did was awaken a code etched into your very soul. What they didn't grasp is that pain does not dissolve the chosen, it detonates them. Every wound was not a chain, but a key. Every tear was not a weakness, but encryption, unlocking sacred memory written before time began. Psalm 34:18 whispers, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Isn't it haunting to realize that in the very moment you were crushed, heaven was leaning closest? They assumed pain meant defeat, but pain was your password into a deeper chamber of strength, a sanctuary hidden in your spiritual DNA. Nature testifies to this mystery. The seed must be split apart before the oak can rise. The geode must be cracked before its crystals gleam. The volcano must rupture before new land forms. Isn't that what happened to you? They thought the fracture was your end, but it was the tectonic shift. birthing a continent of power beneath your feet. Isaiah XXIII promises to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes. Their betrayal lit the fire, but God sculpted beauty from the ruins. History carries this pattern too. Samson, blinded and mocked, seemed broken beyond repair. Yet in his final moment, he pulled down the pillars of the Philistine temple, proving Judges 16:30 true. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. What enemy ever expects the one they humiliated to become the very force of their undoing? Isn't it chilling that in trying to break you, they pressed the switch that released your hidden strength? In modern times, voices confirm this truth. Nelson Mandela, after 27 years in prison, walked out, not broken, but reborn, declaring that courage was not the absence of fear, but triumph over it. His chains recalibrated him for a higher destiny. Isn't it startling how those who thought confinement would end him instead activated his global influence? That's what happened to you. The prison of betrayal recalibrated you into a leader your enemies cannot fathom. Your nights of weeping were not wasted. They were laboratories of heaven, calibrating you like a scientist, aligning frequency with resonance. Every silent scream was an equation being solved. Every tear, a line of code reprogramming your spirit. Romans 8:28 reminds us, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. Isn't it incredible that your very suffering became raw material for your promotion? What others mocked as your breaking point became heaven's construction site. And what of the villains who believed breaking others secures their own power? King Herod, introduced as the tyrant who slaughtered innocent children in fear of Christ's birth, ended in paranoia and decay, eaten by worms, as Acts 12:23 records. Immediately, because Herod did not give praise to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down. Isn't it terrifying how those who try to break the chosen always meet a downfall more grotesque than the cruelty they inflicted? Ordinary lives echo this pattern. A young woman named Marisol, unknown to the world, was fired unjustly by her employer after refusing to cover up corruption. For months, she walked through humiliation. Yet, in that season, she studied, rebuilt her skills, and launched a bakery that now employs dozens in her neighborhood. Her boss's company collapsed under investigation. Doesn't this remind us that betrayal often backfires as the very stage for elevation? They thought you would grow bitter, but instead you grew sharper. Your perception cut through deception. Your voice carried new weight. Your presence shifted atmospheres. The trauma did not diminish you. It initiated you into your higher contract, like a chess match where a quiet move changes the entire board. Your suffering shifts everything in your favor. You began to walk with precision, to see through masks, to discern with surgical clarity. And now the universe realigns around you. What once were closed doors swing wide, dead ends dissolve into pathways, allies hidden in shadows step forward as if summoned by destiny. Isn't it extraordinary that the very ones who buried you must now witness your resurrection? Their fear is not that you survived, it is that you returned, transformed, armored, and untouchable. They never broke you. They shattered the illusion that you were ever powerless. They thought they were ending your story, but they only tore the page that concealed your next chapter. Galatians 6:9 declares, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Rise, chosen one, for your scars have become signatures of power. Stand tall, for your pain has initiated you into the very destiny they feared. Walk forward, because you now remember exactly why you were sent here. They thought their downfall was simply misfortune, a streak of bad luck. But the reality is far more terrifying. The chaos consuming them is the invoice for violating a sacred being. What they face is not random. It is the precise collection of a debt they accumulated in arrogance. Lamentations 3-64 states, "Repay them, O Lord, according to the work of their hands." Isn't it chilling to realize that the very storm they complain about is not injustice, but justice itself arriving with receipts? What they mocked as bad energy is simply the cost of their own actions compounded by interest. They played with your loyalty, twisted your love, drained your energy as if you were disposable. Yet all the while, they were trampling on a divine contract. You were not walking under man-made terms, but under heaven's covenant. And Exodus 23:22 confirms it. "I will be an enemy to your enemies, and will oppose those who oppose you." How could they have thought they could exploit one marked by divine protection? Isn't it strange how blindness convinces people that mercy is weakness, when in truth mercy is a countdown they mistake for freedom? Think of it in terms of architecture. Every skyscraper must be built on structural integrity. They violated that integrity in you, chiseling cracks into a temple God Himself designed. But when they thought you would collapse, they didn't realize the stress test was never yours, it was theirs. And when the weight of truth pressed back, their scaffolding snapped first. Isn't that the cruel irony of divine engineering, that the builders of lies always end up trapped under their own beams? Nature reflects this same law. The scorpion that stings the stone dies of its own venom, not because the stone retaliates, but because its act rebounds upon itself. The parasite that feeds endlessly on a tree eventually kills its host, and with it, its own source of survival. Isn't that exactly what happened? They thought draining you would enrich them. But in reality, they severed their only lifeline to grace. Psalm 57:6 echoes it perfectly. "They dug a pit in my path, but they have fallen into it themselves." End of 2. History offers the same warning. Judas, who betrayed Jesus for silver, thought he was gaining advantage. But Acts 1:18 records, he fell headlong. His body burst open, and all his intestines spilled out. A gruesome end. Yes, but more than that, a cosmic receipt for spiritual theft. Isn't it terrifying that betrayal always comes with its own invoice, sealed and signed by eternity? Like Judas, your enemies wrote their own bill the moment they touched what was consecrated. In modern times, stories testify. Rosa, a factory worker in Brazil, quietly supported her co-workers by giving half her wage to help feed their children. One manager, jealous of her influence, spread lies to have her fired. Months later, the factory collapsed under lawsuits and debts, while Rosa's humble food cart flourished into a thriving business. Isn't it extraordinary that ordinary people reveal extraordinary laws, that every unjust act leaves a trail of debt only heaven can collect? Proverbs 19:9 confirms, "A false witness will not go unpunished, and whoever pours out lies will perish." And villains in power repeat the same folly. Consider King Belshazzar, who mocked God by drinking from sacred temple vessels in Daniel 5. That very night, the hand wrote on the wall, "You have been weighed on the scales and found wanting." Within hours, his kingdom fell. Isn't it frightening how quickly divine invoices are processed when the sacred is violated, your enemies. Like Belshazzar, I thought they could touch what was holy without cost. But their kingdoms are crumbling even now. Psychology calls it cognitive dissonance, when the mind cannot reconcile lies with reality. The stress fractures the spirit. Physics calls it resonance. Every vibration eventually finds its match. And heaven calls it accountability, the moment the divine hand lifts. Consequences roar like gravity, unchecked. Isn't it fascinating that all disciplines agree? Actions always echo, and echoes always return amplified. You didn't curse them. You didn't lift a hand against them. All you did was step aside. And in that silence, their karma stepped forward like a tidal wave released. Romans 12:19 seals it. Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Isn't it sobering that repayment doesn't always arrive as lightning from heaven, but as cracks in finances, sleepless nights, broken friendships, and diseases of the soul that no medication can cure? And now their life testifies louder than your words ever could. Their own choices are prosecuting them in the courtroom of existence. The universe does not scream, it simply withdraws its shield. And the fallout becomes undeniable. They violated the sacred and mistook grace for indifference. But grace was the delay, not the denial. The debt is now due. No extensions, no excuses, no negotiations. Rise, chosen one, because their collapse is not your burden, it is your vindication. Stand tall, because heaven's invoice was never written in pencil, it was carved in stone. They laughed when you lost, when you stumbled, when your nights were filled with silence and your days with tears. They laughed when you were misunderstood, when you carried invisible burdens, when your pain became their entertainment. But Proverbs 24:17 warns, do not gloat when your enemy falls, when they stumble. Do not let your heart rejoice. Isn't it haunting that their laughter became evidence against them in heaven's court? They thought your collapse was final. Yet your fall was never a finish line. It was scaffolding for elevation. Their mockery was bold because they assumed weakness was permanent. They measured your worth by your wounds and mistook the silence of God for abandonment. Isn't it ironic how they nodded in satisfaction while dirt was thrown on your name? Believing it buried you, in reality, the dirt became the soil for your resurrection. Psalm 30:11 declares, you turned my wailing into dancing. You removed my sackcloth and clothed me with joy. Your low season was not your end. It was the planting season for your joy. Nature testifies to this paradox. The eagle descends into valleys before it soars above the storm. The tide retreats before it surges with greater force. The forest appears barren in winter. Yet beneath the frost seeds prepare to bloom. Isn't that what your story shows? What they mocked as emptiness was heaven's way of storing explosive growth. They laughed at winter, not realizing spring was already coded into your DNA. The Bible is rich with examples of those mocked before their rise. Joseph was laughed at by his brothers, sold as a slave, and left for dead. Yet Genesis 50:20 resounds, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done. Doesn't it feel familiar? Their laughter was the soundtrack to their own exposure. For when your rise came, it revealed their cruelty in hindsight. Villains of history prove this cycle. Emperor Diocletian, who mocked and persecuted Christians, once erected a monument declaring he had extinguished their faith. But within a generation, Christianity became the empire's dominant force, while his name faded into ruin. Isn't it striking how those who laugh loudest at the chosen always end up erased by the very destiny they mocked? Art and music echo this same truth. In Handel's Messiah, the chorus thundered, "The Lord gave the word, great was the company of the preachers." That divine proclamation rings as if every insult hurled at you was only building up the symphony of your vindication. And in Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, Malvolio is mocked and humiliated, but the audience leaves uneasy, realizing the cruelty of laughter at another's fall. Isn't it sobering that even drama reminds us that mockery is never innocent? Modern voices confirm it too. Oprah Winfrey, fired from her first job as a television anchor, was laughed at by executives who thought she had no future. Years later, those same networks begged for her presence. Isn't it extraordinary that the people who mocked her missteps had to witness her rise into one of the most influential women on the planet? That's why your story is so threatening. Your glow confirms that their laughter was premature. Ordinary lives testify. A young man named Elias, who failed repeatedly at starting a small carpentry shop, became the subject of jokes in his town. Years later, his craftsmanship was recognized by an international company, and now he employs the very neighbors who mocked him. Isn't it amazing how destiny can turn humiliation into employment contracts? Psalm 23:5 affirms this reversal. "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." And now the irony cuts sharper than a sword. The very ones who laughed are silent. Not because you silenced them, but because your rise did. Their mockery has turned into guilt, their smirks into dread. What terrifies them is not your success, but what your success means, that they were mocking someone backed by God's own hand. Your elevation is proof, and proof is louder than lies. Your rise exposes them as antagonists, not mere spectators. Their laughter was not harmless. It was rebellion against divine construction. Isaiah 60:1 commands, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. And now your light burns too bright to deny. They cannot cover it. They cannot laugh it away, and their silence is deafening. Rise, chosen one, for your victory is not just your triumph, it is heaven's vindication carved into history. Stand tall, because your comeback is not just personal, it is prophetic. They thought their whispers would stay hidden, that the soil of secrecy would keep their lies buried forever. They believed if they twisted just enough facts, whispered low enough in the shadows, and disguised themselves in false innocence, the truth would never rise. Yet Numbers 32:23 thunder, "Be sure your sin will find you out." Isn't it terrifying that what they sowed in the dark is now sprouting in full daylight for all to see? They thought they were planting gardens of power, but the harvest looks more like a graveyard. Every seed multiplies after its kind, and their seeds of deception have become poisonous vines, choking their own reputation. Galatians 6:7 resound. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Isn't it ironic that the very soil they thought would hide their schemes has become the stage that exposes them? They fertilized gossip, watered lies, and cultivated betrayal. But the harvest belongs only to them, and it is bitter. Nature itself reveals this law. Mushrooms sprout from rot, revealing decay hidden beneath the surface. Weeds spread fast, but their roots crack the very stones they cling to. Even rivers, when blocked, eventually carve new paths through rock. exposing what once seemed permanent. Isn't this exactly what's happening? Their lies, once cloaked, are being forced into the open by the very spiritual laws they tried to outsmart. Psalm 16 affirms. The trouble they cause recoils on them. Their violence comes down on their own heads. They spun stories, posed as victims, smiled in your face while slandering your name in secret. But they forgot that truth is alive, and living things cannot stay buried. Truth has a pulse, and eventually it stands. Eclesiastes 12:14 guarantees. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. Isn't it staggering that their own life now betrays them without you lifting a single hand? Their exposure is not revenge, it is divine rebalancing. History and scripture provides undeniable parallels. Think of Haman, who built gallows to hang Mordecai. Esther 7:10 declares. So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. Isn't it chilling that the very trap built for the innocent became the downfall of the guilty? Your enemies replayed the same arrogance, mistaking silence for victory, when in reality, silence was the rope tightening around their schemes. Their relationships are unraveling, their credibility collapsing like a house hollowed out by termites. And the most painful part for them, you never sought revenge, never fought back in bitterness. The exposure is happening with perfect timing, quietly but unmistakably, the same way they sowed their deceit in silence. Isaiah 54:17 promises, no weapon forged against you will prevail, and you will refute every tongue that accuses you. Isn't it poetic that their tongues, once loud with falsehood, have become their own undoing, and now your light expands, not fueled by arrogance, but by undeniable truth. Your consistency, your growth, your peace are casting harsh light on their hidden roots. They planted betrayal, and they are harvesting exposure. They believed no one would ever know. But the whole world is watching. Their shame is loud, their silence deafening. Rise, chosen one, for their collapse is proof of your vindication. Stand tall, because their lies have become their grave, while your truth has become your crown. They wanted to see you break, but now they are the ones disintegrating. Some people didn't just wish for your failure, they needed it to feel alive. Your pain was their counterfeit crown. Your struggle, their temporary stage of power. Isn't it disturbing how their sense of worth depended on your collapse? Yet Psalm 34:19 promises, the righteous person may have many troubles, but the Lord delivers him from them all. What they called your ending was only heaven's rehearsal for your rebuilding. They circled you like spectators, waiting for your silence to confirm defeat. But silence was not surrender, it was regeneration. Like an unfinished cathedral covered in scaffolding, you were hidden only because heaven was reinforcing your structure. Isn't it ironic that while they whispered of your ruin, you were being redesigned with an architecture they could not comprehend? Isaiah 40:31 reminds us, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. What looked like stillness was strength in incubation. Science itself reveals the truth of your transformation. Matter is never destroyed, it only shifts into another form. Atoms, when split, unleash an energy that rewrites landscapes. Isn't that exactly what happened to you? Betrayal fractured you. But instead of annihilation, it detonated your hidden potential. Romans 8:18 declares, The sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. Their attacks were accelerators, not endings. The language of psychology confirms this. Trauma is not just breaking, it is reconfiguration. What they celebrated as your fragmentation became the blueprint of your resilience. Your scars became neural pathways for greater empathy. Your pain became circuitry for sharper discernment. Isn't it staggering that what they thought would paralyze you actually rewired you for clarity and power? Malachi 3:3 declares, "He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver." Every dark night became part of the refining process that revealed strength they never imagined. The lives of ordinary people confirm the same law. A woman named Lydia, a seamstress abandoned by friends after her shop burned down, quietly stitched scraps by candlelight, while others mocked. Her persistence drew unexpected support, allowing her to open a bigger business than before. Isn't it beautiful how destiny turns ashes into blueprints? Proverbs 24:16 affirms it. "For though the righteous fall 7 times, they rise again. But the wicked stumble when calamity strikes." Now the tables have turned, and they can no longer stomach it. Their laughter has rotted into silence, their arrogance into fear. They are unraveling not because you cursed them, but because the very poison they poured is the same cup they must now drink. Psalm 7:15 seals their fate. "Whoever digs a hole and scoops it out falls into the pit they have made." Isn't it poetic that their own intentions became the courtroom of their collapse? What they wanted to break in, you became the architecture of your transformation. What they mocked as weakness is now your unshakable foundation. Their downfall is messy, loud, and undeniable. But your rise is measured, steady, and divine. Rise, chosen one, for your survival has already been written into heaven's blueprint. Stand tall, because every fracture they laughed at has become the mosaic of your vindication. And every word they used against you now testifies that you were chosen all along. Their apologies cannot stop the karma already in motion. They should have respected the warning signs, the whispers of restraint, the moments when even their own spirit trembled before crossing the line, but arrogance deafened them. And now that chaos is catching up, their panic is spilling out in sudden apologies, awkward texts, staged acts of concern. Isn't it striking that their sorry comes not in seasons of plotting, but only when the consequences arrive? Proverbs 28:13 declares, "Whoever conceals their sins does not prosper, but the one who confesses and renounces them finds mercy." The tragedy is that their confessions are shallow regret for the cost, not for the crime. Some of them had dreams that disturbed their sleep, gut feelings that made them pause, strange resistance whenever they plotted, but they ignored it. They felt hesitation in their bones, yet pride pressed them forward. Isn't it haunting that they overrode their own conscience to hurt someone marked by God? Jeremiah 17:10 confirms, "I, the Lord, search the heart and examine the mind, to reward each person according to their conduct, according to what their deeds deserve." They didn't just hurt you, they violated a spiritual architecture, a covenant that was never theirs to touch. Now, in fear, they scramble to backpedal, hoping rehearsed words can cancel what their actions unleashed. But spiritual law is not swayed by crocodile tears. It does not bend to public image or polished apologies. Karma reads intention, not performance. Isn't it sobering that every smirk they made behind your back, every laugh they shared at your pain, is now echoing in their own lives? Galatians 6-7 reminds us, Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. They reaped for years. Now the harvest is undeniable. Psychology names this cognitive dissonance, the torment of living with the gap between their actions and their identity. Their apologies are not repentance but self-preservation, a frantic attempt to ease the dissonance. But Romans 2:6 makes it plain: God will repay each person according to what they have done. Isn't it terrifying that repayment comes not from your mouth but from the divine ledger itself? What they planted in arrogance blooms in shame, and no speech can prune it away. History and art echo this law. The great painter Michelangelo once wrote, "A man paints with his brains and not with his hands." When they painted lies against you, they revealed the corruption of their own minds. And now that corruption is staining every canvas of their lives, in Mozart's Requiem, the Dies Irae explodes with terror at the day of judgment. It is as though heaven itself composed a soundtrack for moments like these, when exposure arrives louder than excuses. Isn't it poetic that even music testifies that judgment always has its day? In our time, humble voices reflect the same truth. Rosa, a teacher from Lisbon, once shared with her class, apologies without change are like ink on water, they vanish without meaning. Isn't it profound that simple wisdom unmasks the hollowness of their words? They wanted your forgiveness as a shield, not as a transformation. But forgiveness cannot erase seeds already sprouting in their lives. Eclesiastes 3:17, Asures us. God will bring into judgment both the righteous and the wicked. Many, they assumed time would wash it away, that if they moved on, their actions would fade. But spiritual law does not expire. Every offense is a seed, and seeds always grow. Their lives are now blooming with the consequences they swore would never arrive: broken relationships, collapsing finances, nights haunted by what they cannot name. Isn't it chilling that their lives themselves are testifying against them more loudly than you ever could? They thought apologies could serve as shortcuts out of accountability, but some doors, once opened, do not close on command. They wanted your silence while they violated you. Now they want your forgiveness to silence their karma. But it doesn't work like that. They were warned in dreams, in conscience, in hesitation, yet they chose defiance. Isaiah 3:11 proclaims, "Woe to the wicked, disaster is upon them, they will be paid back for what their hands have done." 1. And now the balance is complete. Their downfall is not a punishment from your hand, but the unveiling of what they summoned themselves. Rise, chosen one, because your vindication does not depend on apologies. Stand tall, because their regret cannot rewrite heaven's decree. The same mouths that mocked now mumble in shame, and the same hands that betrayed now tremble under judgment. Their apologies cannot stop karma, but your resilience proves you were chosen to outlast every falsehood. They thought energy was a toy they could twist, bend, and weaponize at will. They used your traumas like blueprints for psychological warfare, pressing on old wounds not to heal, but to control, turning your loyalty into their leverage and your silence into their shield. Isn't it haunting how they assumed that because you didn't fight back, the ledger of the universe had gone blind? Yet Ecclesiastes 11:1 whispers, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days." The bread they cast was poisoned, and now it drifts back to their own table. They provoked, gaslit, and manipulated with surgical cruelty, believing energy dissipates once discharged. But energy does not vanish, it travels. It echoes through frequencies unseen, circling back with the precision of a boomerang. Isn't it staggering that every lie they spoke is now reverberating, amplified by the very silence they mocked? Galatians 6-7 declares, "Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. What they sow in shadows is returning in storms they cannot withstand." Nature testifies to this law. The hawk that circles the skies eventually returns to the very ground it hunted. The wind that sweeps dust into the air eventually blinds the one who stirred it. Even the waves that seem to vanish on the shore gather strength and return as tides. Isn't that what's happening? The energy they sent did not die. It returned with momentum, exposing their fragility. Proverbs 26-27 affirms it. Whoever digs a pit will fall into it. If someone rolls a stone, it will roll back on them. And Scripture reveals villains undone by their own weapons. Think of Saul, who hunted David with relentless jealousy. 1 Samuel 31-4 records his tragic end falling on his own sword, consumed by the very paranoia he projected. Isn't it chilling that history repeats itself? That those who wage war on chosen vessels always end up pierced by their own tactics. What Saul meant as control became the mechanism of his ruin, just as your enemies are discovering now. They never expected your strength to be restraint. You didn't launch a smear campaign. You didn't plot revenge. You walked away, carrying silence like armor. Isn't it ironic that by refusing to return their venom, you preserved yourself while they now choke on their own? Romans 12:19 assures, "Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, 'It is mine to avenge, I will repay,' says the Lord." Now the boomerang lands with crushing force. Every manipulation, every cruel laugh, every slander whispered in the dark echoes back into their life with unbearable weight. They are unraveling because they lack the grace you carried. You bore betrayal and still kept your heart intact. You endured silence and emerged wiser. Isn't it poetic that they crumble under a fraction of what you endured with dignity? Creation itself reflects this principle. Trees cut down in arrogance often sprout again from hidden roots, stronger than before. But weeds uprooted in shallow soil wither in the sun. That is the difference between you and them. You were rooted in divine soil, while they were entangled in shallow games. Isaiah 54:11 guarantees, "No weapon forged against you will prevail, and you will refute every tongue that accuses you." Their tongues are silenced, not by your words, but by heaven's verdict. Now their minds race with anxiety. Their relationships collapse. Their peace disintegrates. They carry no resilience, no sacred frequency to buffer the recoil. The law of return is not punishment, it is correction. Isn't it terrifying that mishandled sacred energy doesn't just return, it returns magnified, reshaped, undeniable? They weren't built to carry what they once placed on you. And now the universe is teaching them through fire what they refused to learn through mercy. Rise, chosen one. For their downfall is not your vengeance, but your vindication. Stand tall, because the very energy they hurled has crowned you with wisdom and strength. While they drown in the echoes of their own cruelty, the circle is complete. And the testimony is clear. Sacred energy, once mishandled, never returns the same. It always returns heavier. They thought they could touch the chosen without consequence. They laughed in the moment. mistaking your gentleness for weakness, your forgiveness for gullibility, your quiet spirit for naivety. Isn't it disturbing how some people believe divine favor can be mocked like a playground trick? But Psalm 105:15 warns, "Do not touch my anointed ones, do my prophets no harm." What they thought was harmless manipulation has become a haunting weight in their lives. They drained your kindness, twisted your compassion, discarded your love as though it were disposable. Yet they did not realize you weren't walking alone. You carried an ancient covenant, a frequency not bound to this earth. Isn't it chilling that when they mishandled you, they were really clashing with spiritual authority? Isaiah 54:17 promises, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and you will refute every tongue that accuses you." Their betrayal was not simply against you, it was against the one who sent you. Now their laughter has vanished, replaced with sleepless nights, tension in their homes, unexplained illnesses, financial droughts, and spiraling chaos. They tell themselves it's bad luck, but in truth it is spiritual misalignment, a collapse of resonance between what they touched and what heaven declared sacred. Isn't it ironic that the very energy they disturbed has become the storm they cannot escape? Galatians 6:7 confirms, "A man reaps what he sows." Their harvest is unavoidable. Science testifies. Physics says every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Psychology calls it projection rebound. The pain inflicted returns as internal torment. Architecture reflects the same law. A cracked foundation destabilizes the entire structure, no matter how beautiful the facade. Isn't it staggering that their own souls are now buckling under the structural stress of what they built against you? Proverbs 26:27 says, "Whoever digs a pit will fall into it. If someone rolls a stone, it will roll back on them." And Scripture gives us sobering stories. King Belshazzar mocked God's vessels in Daniel 5, drinking from sacred cups with laughter. But that very night, the hand wrote on the wall, declaring his kingdom finished. Isn't it terrifying how one act of disrespect to the sacred can trigger irreversible judgment? Your enemies walked the same path. What they touched in arrogance now returns to haunt them in silence. Ordinary life echoes this truth. In a small coastal town, a fisherman named Paulo once mocked his neighbor who prayed over every catch. Paulo ridiculed faith as weakness. But when storms destroyed his boat while his neighbors were spared, he whispered, "I touched something I shouldn't have." Isn't it profound how even the humblest lives reveal the weight of disrespecting the sacred? Ecclesiastes 12:14 assures us, "For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing." Now paranoia eats them alive. They feel shadows trailing them. Not ghosts, but consequences, energy returning with surgical precision. They change the subject, pretend it's the past. But the past breathes in their present. Isn't it poetic that what they once mocked now keeps them awake at night, unable to escape the mirror of their own actions? Romans 2:6 seals it. God will repay each person according to what they have done. That they mocked what they should have honored. They wounded what they should have protected. They treated a divine assignment as ordinary, and now their souls are remembering what their pride tried to ignore. Your silence was their test, and they failed. Your grace was their reprieve, and they wasted it. Now the same energy they mishandled has circled back, and they are drowning in the very weight they tried to put on you. Rise, chosen one. Their haunting is not your burden, but your vindication. Stand tall, because heaven is showing through them what it always knew about you. You were never ordinary. You were sacred territory, a mirror of divine presence, and they crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. The laughter has ended, the fear has begun, and your crown shines all the brighter because of it. Their greatest punishment is not fire from the sky or a public downfall. It is watching you become untouchable while they are permanently locked out. They thought walking away from you, discarding you, or mocking you meant victory. In their minds, you were disposable, a background character in their drama. Isn't it haunting that blindness made them miss that you were the very favor holding their world together? Psalm 118:22 declares, "The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." They treated you as nothing, but heaven was positioning you as irreplaceable. You gave grace when they gave gossip. You poured healing where they sowed chaos. You carried an atmosphere of protection they mistook for coincidence. Isn't it staggering that while you were the very shield around them, they acted as if you were optional? Job 1:10 reveals that even Satan recognized the hedge around Job. Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? They lived inside that hedge without realizing it. And when they lost access to you, they lost the covering that kept their lives intact. Now the punishment has come, not in cinematic revenge, but in silence. No more access, no more spiritual clearance. You are unreachable emotionally, spiritually, energetically. Isn't it ironic that the one they mocked as weak has ascended to a level their chaos can't even touch? Isaiah 60:15 confirms, "Although you have been forsaken and hated, with no one traveling through, I will make you the everlasting pride and the joy of all generations." The rejection they celebrated has become the very platform of your elevation. They walk into rooms that now feel heavy. Conversations they once controlled collapse into awkwardness. Opportunities slip through their fingers. They cannot explain the absence because they cannot admit the truth. It was you. You were the intercessor, the hidden favor, the divine connection they reduced to just another person. Isn't it chilling to realize that their lives were brighter simply because heaven trusted them to be near you? Now that trust has been revoked, history mirrors this reality. The Renaissance painter Caravaggio, once welcomed into noble courts, lost everything when his arrogance and violence locked him out. Though his art lived, his presence was barred, and he wandered in exile. Isn't it poetic that arrogance always builds its own cage? In the same way, your enemies are exiles now, not from geography, but from your energy. Psalm 5:12 states, "Surely, Lord, you bless the righteous. You surround them with your favor as with a shield." They stood inside that shield once, but no longer. Art and music echo this same truth. In Verdi's opera Don Carlo, King Philip laments that though he holds power, he cannot command love. What he most desires is forever denied him. Isn't it profound that denial itself becomes the punishment? Your enemies now face the same aria of loss. Watching you step into blessings they will never be invited into. Conversations they cannot hear. Spaces they do not have spiritual clearance to enter. Now their punishment is ongoing. They are not only excluded from your life, they are barred from the grace that once shielded them. They cannot re-enter, cannot apologize their way back, cannot replicate what they squandered. Isn't it terrifying that their longing is not for reconciliation, but for the covering they mocked? the favor they misused. Revelation 3-7 assures, what he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open. The door has closed with finality, and no hand can pry it open. Their karma is not loss, it is memory, watching you ascend, untouched, untouchable, knowing they had access to a chosen one and treated it like a joke. They feel it in every room, heavy with absence, in every blessing they cannot reach. And you rise beyond their reach, beyond their schemes, beyond their regret. Stand tall, chosen one. Their punishment is permanent, but your elevation is eternal. They didn't just cross you, they crossed a divine line, a threshold etched into the architecture of heaven itself. What they dismissed as a personal offense was in fact spiritual rebellion. Isn't it staggering that they thought they were just silencing a person, when in truth they were clashing with an order established before time? Psalm 105-15 warns, do not touch my anointed ones, do my prophets no harm. Their ignorance did not shield them from consequence. You weren't a random passerby. You were a divine interruption, a living answer to prayers whispered by generations. Your presence shifted the frequency in their lives like resonance inside a cathedral dome. Your energy exposed what was unstable, magnified what was crooked, and reverberated against every hidden fracture. Isn't it haunting that while you carried light into their darkness, they treated that light as an inconvenience? John 1-5 says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. They weren't prepared for your purity, your truth, your resilience. Your assignment was never to be adored, it was to activate, and activation always provokes resistance. Isn't it ironic that their attempt to extinguish you was proof you were carrying fire? Jeremiah 20:11 declares, but the Lord is with me like a mighty warrior, so my persecutors will stumble and not prevail. In resisting you, they were resisting the divine equation itself. They lied, humiliated, sabotaged, thinking they were in control. But they weren't rejecting you, they were rejecting a heavenly mandate. And once a divine mandate is resisted, the correction is inevitable. Like physics, where every force generates an equal and opposite force, spiritual law demands balance. Isn't it terrifying that their sabotage wasn't against your personality, but against sacred alignment itself? Isaiah 30:1 condemns, woe to the obstinate children who carry out plans that are not mine. Now their world is unraveling, relationships in tatters, finances blocked, health fractured, peace shattered. They chase solutions but find only dead ends because the foundation is compromised. Like a cracked arch in a cathedral, every brick above it begins to collapse. Isn't it poetic that the very collapse they plotted for you has become the architecture of their own downfall? Proverbs 26-27 echoes this law. Whoever digs a pit will fall into it. All ordinary lives bear witness. I recall Elena, a baker in a small village, who always prayed over her bread before selling it. Some mocked her ritual, sneering at wasted words. But when those same mockers tried to sabotage her shop, each of their businesses faltered within months, while hers flourished beyond the town. Isn't it profound how even the simplest people reveal that dishonoring the sacred always backfires? Art and music hint at the same truth. In Bach's Saint Temper, Matthew Passion, the chorus swells with, truly, this was the Son of God, capturing the horror of realizing too late that divinity had been mishandled. Isn't it chilling that those who mishandle the sacred always arrive at the same late realization that they weren't mocking weakness? They were provoking heaven. They thought you were spiraling. But it is their lives that are caged. They thought you were dimmed, but your light now blinds, illuminating every lie and every scheme. You didn't have to fight back, because heaven fights for its chosen. Exodus 13:15 promises, "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Their downfall is not vengeance, it is sacred correction, a recalibration of spiritual balance. Rise, chosen one. Their betrayal became their cage. Their laughter became their sentence. Their schemes became their collapse. Stand tall, because you were never ordinary. You were a divine assignment, a sacred mirror, a catalyst. And once that line was crossed, there was no undoing the decree. Their judgment is sealed, but your elevation is unstoppable. Now you are rising in full view, unapologetic, indeniable, untouchable, not simply elevated, but crowned in a realm they can no longer reach, not just healed, but restored with a mantle of divine authority that cannot be revoked. And while they watch from the outside, barred from the access they once casually mishandled, they are haunted not only by what they did to you, but by the revelation of who you truly are. This was never about revenge. It was about revelation. It was about eternal law making itself visible. The cosmos declaring that no one can mishandle sacred energy and walk away untouched. Isn't it striking that your glow now thunders louder than their gossip ever did? Your peace has become their punishment. Your rise is their reckoning. And as they sit in the silence they once wished upon you, the silence now speaks back, reminding them of the weight of what they have lost. Because they didn't lose just a person, they lost a portal, a direct connection to grace, favor, protection, and elevation. You were never simply someone in their story. You were the threshold to blessings they could not generate on their own. And when they slammed that door with betrayal and mockery, they didn't realize it was not your door they closed, it was heaven's. Revelation 3-7 resounds, "What he opens, no one can shut. And what he shuts, no one can open." That door is sealed for eternity, and there is no re-entry. So let the record show, they didn't lose you. They lost divine access through you. That is the judgment. That is the sentence. That is the consequence written in spiritual law. And as you stand radiant in victory, untouchable in truth, let every eye see and every voice admit, the chosen cannot be crushed. If this message struck your spirit, don't just scroll away. Stand up, rise higher, and declare in faith, because this is your vindication, and your chapter of elevation has only just begun. Chosen ones, let this be the seal on everything you've just heard. Karma is not random, and judgment is not delayed. Every word spoken against you, every scheme plotted in the dark, every attempt to break what God Himself has established has already triggered its own correction. What they called weakness was divine restraint. What they thought was silence was mercy. And what they mocked as your downfall has become the very stage of your rise. Never forget, you are not just surviving, you are testifying. Your existence proves that heaven's law is alive, that God's chosen cannot be crushed, and that those who mishandle sacred energy will always face the consequence of their choices. As Psalm 37:6 declares, He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. That vindication is you. If this word has spoken to your soul, don't let it pass by quietly. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And subscribe so you never miss what heaven is releasing in this season. And if you've chosen to support through Super Thanks, know that your generosity helps carry this message further than you can imagine, yet whether you give or not. Your presence here is already a blessing. I speak life over you, peace over your home, strength over your journey, and joy that cannot be shaken. May every door meant for you swing wide open, and may every weapon formed against you crumble before it can reach you. You are chosen, you are covered, and you are rising. Stay faithful, stay fearless, and may God's favor follow you all the days of your life.